Hey guys, Sandro here from Carcraft Auto Detailing in Melbourne. Welcome to part 5 of the step-by-step 3-stage correction and protection detail on this Giulietta QV. I finished the previous episode by doing my test panel to see what combination of compound, polish, pads and machine technique was going to give me the best results for this particular detail. Now it's time to use that information and adapt it for each specific painted panel on this car. This episode will be largely geared around the machine selection and paint and compounding polishing techniques needed to correct the paint and produce the desired results. As there is quite a bit of footage to get through, and as I don't want this episode to go too long, I'll just give you some information on a few things that I've already covered rather than repeating the footage for each step. As I stated during the test panel section, it's really important to stay consistent in your method, as it'll greatly eliminate potential issues that can negatively impact your progress and results. More specifically, I'm referring to the diverse areas of residue control. This started with the decontamination process and will continue throughout the correction stages, just on a different level. I've stripped the paint as best I can, but as I begin compounding, like it or not, there will be certain varying levels of residue, such as remaining environmental fallout, wax and sealant, the clear coat itself, which can also vary from the top oxidized layer to the more uniform layer underneath, and the compounds and polishes I'm using themselves. That's a lot the paint has to deal with, and unless you manage all that residue, you'll not only slow your progress, but also limit the level of finish you could potentially achieve. The first important step is to continually clean the pads. Blowing out the pads with compressed air is by far the best method, as it's both quick and extremely effective without the need of water or liquids that can dilute and change the way your products behave. Generally, your first set of passes is where you're going to pick up the vast majority of remaining contaminants, residue and oxidized clear coat, so it's the most important time to clean the pad. As if you don't, you're then compounding or polishing your next set of passes with a cocktail of ingredients on your pad that on many levels is going to floor your progress and results. This is also the reason why on a detail such as this, I'll never just do one set of passes per panel. You're far better off doing 2 smaller sets of passes rather than one longer one, as the first set will not only begin the correction stage of the paint, but also largely clear the slate of remaining residue, so that on your second set of passes you can really get down to correcting without all that interfering gunk on your pad and panel. And I really encourage you guys to try it out for yourself. The next cleaning step is the paint itself. I've mentioned that Eraser is perhaps my most used product, and that's because after each set of machine set passes, I do an IPA wipe down. Primarily it's done so I can get a more honest reading of my results on my paint correction progress, as the compound itself will fill minor imperfections, making the paint look better than it really is. Secondly, it's done to thoroughly remove the spent compound or polish, as well as any other remaining fine residue that again is only going to cause issues if it's left there when I continue to correct or protect the paint. So back to the point I was trying to make, that although I'm not going to display blowing out my pads and an IPA wipe down for each panel, as I'm trying to reduce the growing footage and length of this episode, it is a vital step in managing residue for the reasons I've just stated. On a somewhat side note, I recently had a conversation with a couple of detailers that brought up a good point. In detailing or any other industry, there's a certain level of understanding and unique language or terminology that only those in that industry can truly grasp. And I'm sure that for professional detailers or hardcore enthusiasts watching, that a lot of what I'm saying makes sense and is easy to follow. But it made me try to understand that beginners or just others searching for information may find it hard to understand or follow certain things that I take for granted and assume that the viewers understand. It made me take a step back and alter this episode as more of a breakdown of paint correction in relation to everything that is going on and all the things that are subconsciously running through my mind when I grab a polisher, pad, product and put it to paint. So hopefully the footage, together with the text, is explaining and demonstrating each step and panel as I go, as I want to more talk and break down machine correction techniques and the specific things you need to consider so I can further explain how I achieve my results, what my thought process is, and why I choose to go in that direction. But just to do a little catch up at this stage, I remasked the car with tape so that now I'm protecting the previously corrected trims and panels. I started compounding on the A-pillar using my 3-inch SHINEMATE dual action polisher with the Car Pro microfiber cutting pad and fixer compound, which, as you know, is my pad and compound combination for this cutting stage of the paint. And again, although I can't show every set of passes as it would be hours long, I'll try and more so explain, together with the footage, what I'm doing and what it's achieving.
But I have to be me, and everyone can see your anger is misplaced.
This area of touch-up is the only wet sanding I'm going to be doing, as unlike the other little touch-ups, this one is actually really bad. I'm just giving it a light sanding by hand with 2000 grit to remove the touch-up paint, and then 3000 grit to refine the finish and get it ready for the compounding stage. The strange thing is that I couldn't even see any scratch or defect, even after some very light wet sanding. So I'm not really sure what they were trying to cover up, but it's just a good example of some bad touch-up that really didn't even need to be there to start with. What's working best and quickest at getting that 90 to 95% defect removal is on average anywhere from 2 to 4 sets of passes for each section. The level of scratches is different on every panel, as is the amount of cut I'm achieving with the various size pads and machines. So to put it simply, there is no exact formula that can be applied to correct every panel on this or any other paint. My guides along the way, which dictate what's needed, are my defect spotting lights, Car Pro's eraser, and my eyes. To use the pillars as an example, trying to correct the paint with a 5 or 6 inch pad on this and many other smaller sections will work for the majority of those panels. But around the edges, corners, and finer curves, it just can't as effectively correct any significant defects. So a larger pad and machine combination can be great and time-saving for a lesser one-stage polish. But if you're truly trying to correct every tight section on a vehicle, there's just no getting around using smaller pads and machines to effectively correct those areas. In relation to pad size, with all other things equal, basically the larger the pad diameter, the faster it cuts and corrects. It's really the outer edge of the pad that's doing most of the work, so the larger the outer circle is, the faster it spins and more effective it becomes. However, due to the larger size, in certain areas, larger pads just can't get as close to the edge as smaller pads, thus are not able to correct what they can't access. And today's cars have many more smaller panels rather than lesser larger ones of older cars. So the more I've progressed with paint correction, the more I'm using smaller pads and machines.
Your anger is misplaced, and I'm gonna tell you, don't hate me 'cause I get attention. Don't turn me into what I'm not.
Another important thing to touch on is the combination of machine use. As you'll see in the footage, there's basically very few panels where I've only used one machine to correct the paint. This comes back to the pad sizes that are best suited for the more intricate areas. So you could ask then, why wouldn't I just use smaller machines and pads to do the whole car? I could, but it'd just take far longer. The combination of using smaller 3, 2 and 1 inch machines and pads, together with the larger 5 or 6 inch machines, is the fastest and most efficient way to tackle a job like this. On the larger panels, I'll generally use the smaller machines and pads to do a primary correction that is largely focused on the edges, and then I'll do my secondary and final set of passes with a larger machine and pads to address the main areas of that panel. A smaller machine is great for the edges, but just takes far too long to correct the bulk of that panel, whereas larger machines struggle to address the panel edges, but are far quicker at correcting the rest of the panel. So ultimately, the combination of the two is faster and superior at achieving the level of correction I'm after. Also, as I discussed a couple of episodes ago, CarPro's fixer uses D.A.T abrasives, which start off as larger, more aggressive, and then diminish to smaller grits. So most of its cutting ability is being achieved on the first and second row set of passes, while on the third and fourth row passes, it's just more refining the finish. So this, together with the specific paint, changes how I respond to that in my technique. Before I really care about how the compounding is finishing, I want to firstly eliminate the scratches and defects. So what the compound and paint is showing me is that if I stick to only 2 passes on my first or second set, and then do 4 passes on my final set, it's working out to be much faster and a more efficient method that could save me hours of time over the course of correcting the paint. I talk about machine row passes and sets quite a lot, but I don't think I've really discussed it. So to break it down, basically it's the line you run your machine up and down, generally in a 2 by 2 foot area, overlapping each line by 50% and producing a row of passes over the paint once you reach that 2 foot length. Then you'll start your second row of passes by running the pad in the opposite direction to create a crisscross pattern. Once you complete, say 2 passes in one direction and 2 in the other, that becomes your first set of passes. But depending on the paint product and the level of correction you want to achieve, how many rows of passes you do in each set can vary to best address the situation. But why do we as detailers mostly follow this basic method? It's because we want to achieve the most uniform material removal, or UMR, as possible. Concentrating your pad over specific areas to just address the imperfections you see will result in a non-uniform surface that will create varying levels of clarity and finish. It's also the reason why, when you're wet sanding out a scratch or defect, you slowly expand your area as you refine the finish, because you want a more uniform finish that blends seamlessly with the rest of the paint. But just a little bit more on UMR, or uniform material removal. When trying to remove deeper scratches and imperfections, you need to consider a few things and sometimes weigh up what the lesser evil really is. When possible or appropriate, it's always best to aim to produce the most uniform finish you can. But you need to also consider if it really is appropriate to heavily compound or wet sand an entire panel or vehicle to address just a few deeper defects because you want truly uniform material removal. In 99% of cases, I'd say no. Personally, I'd prefer to maintain as much of the paint and clear coat as possible. And if you're not correcting a potentially award-winning show car, I guarantee you that correctly blending in a few scratches will never even be noticeable if done right, and will preserve the integrity and longevity of that overall paint. And even more so when you're dealing with daily drivers, as with this particular detail I'm doing, you need to accept that there will be future scratches that are beyond your control. So, do you really want to cut the paint to a fraction of a millimeter to achieve true perfection? Or do you want to keep as much clear coat as possible so that you can actually remove future scratches?
Hold on, girl, now wait just a minute. I've got something to say, you should hear it. Oh, I'm happy to make time for your feelings, but you have to admit I already do. Let's just break it down.
Machine or pad pressure is another point to cover. Overall, I don't tend to use anything more than light to moderate downward pressure when correcting paint, because heavy pressure does generate more heat, which I'm trying to avoid for many reasons. And it also contributes to pad deterioration and can actually work out to be counterproductive for certain compounds and polishes. But during the compounding stage, overall, some moderate pressure can work out to your advantage in being a more effective technique. Whereas during the refining and polishing stages, it generally does the opposite and flaws the finish. For this particular paint with Fixer, I'm using moderate pressure on my first couple of row passes and then easing off on the last couple of passes, which is not only saving me time but also achieving better results.
Gonna stop. Come on. Listen to me. I've tried so many times to tell you this is as good as I can be. Why isn't it enough to be faithful and also be the hit of the party? Let's just break it down to you and me uptown, dancing all around.
Arm speed is yet another factor to consider. Generally, the slower you go, the more correction you will achieve. So when actually compounding the paint, that's what you want to be doing. But you need to consider the compound and paint as well. If your arm movement is too slow, a D.A.T abrasive such as Fixer may break down too quickly before you even finish your first row of passes, creating more cut in certain areas and an uneven finish. And if you're working on a soft paint, going too slow may generate extra unwanted heat that is going to mar and compromise the paint. Whereas when you're polishing, finishing and drilling paint, a faster arm movement will usually generate superior results, as you're not so much correcting or eliminating defects as you are refining the finish. So going too slow may create more cut and reduce the polisher's ability to refine the finish. But again, this is a generalization and all relative to the specific paint, pad and polish combinations. This then leads me to discuss why we firstly spread the compound or polish quickly into the panel as well as prime the pads with product. Firstly, and quite obviously, we don't want that product flinging everywhere causing a mess. But perhaps a little less known is that it's done to create a more uniform cutting and refining correction process over the panel, and from the pad itself having a uniform coverage on the product of its surface. Now whether the product uses D.A.T, SMAT or a combination of those abrasives, every compound and polish does lose its effectiveness over time due to a number of factors such as heat, dusting and the collection of clear coat. So rather than just having to rely on the product directly on the pad, having unworked compound or polish spread over the panel allows the pad to continually pick up and work in fresh product to produce a more even level of cut throughout that area.
Your feelings, but you have to admit I already do. Let's just break it down to you and me uptown, dancing all around.
I know most of you will have heard that you should stick by 2 by 2 foot size area for machine use as it works best, but I want to elaborate why. Firstly, it's due to the fact that it means you don't need to walk around or stretch as much while you're polishing, putting you off balance and straining your back, arms and neck. Secondly, regardless of whether you believe it or not, it is faster when correcting paint to use smaller sections rather than larger ones. You just can't as effectively compound a whole or even half a large car panel in one go. The issues you're faced with is overworking and heating the pad, machine and paint, together with a reduced cutting ability, which in turn equals a far slower process. And thirdly, spreading your compound into an overly large area causes it to dry, dust and lose its effectiveness. But once you progress to polishing, you can slightly increase your area as you're working with a faster arm movement and slower machine speed. And when drilling paint, you can again even further increase that area as your arm movement is even faster yet with an even slower machine speed. All of which increases your work time and allows for larger panel areas to be addressed.
Let's just break it down to you and me uptown, dancing all around till the disco ball pops. But I have to be me, and everyone can see your anger is misplaced, and I'm gonna tell you, don't hate me 'cause I get attention. Don't turn me into what I'm not. I have to be me 24/7, and I ain't never gonna stop. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Never gonna stop. No, 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 no. Yeah, 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 yeah.
One thing that has changed quite a bit in the last few decades is the car's painted panels themselves. On a modern car today, you're likely to have a variety of metals and plastics, as well as more specialty materials such as fiberglass and carbon fiber that are all painted to look the same. The biggest difference from a paint correction perspective is how these materials disperse and conduct heat. Metal in general, whether it be steel or aluminium, is great at dispersing and conducting heat. Basically what this means is that as you are machine polishing an area, the heat you generate is slowly travelling throughout that whole panel and dispersing itself in a somewhat even flow away from the specific spot you have your machine running over, which is actually great at minimizing heat and avoiding hot spots that can cause many issues, the greatest of which is burning through the clear coat. Plastic or fibre-based painted panels are quite the opposite. The heat you generate through machine polishing takes far longer to both disperse and travel throughout that panel, which in turn greatly increases the speed in which the polisher heats up the surface and concentrates it in those specific areas. So basically, on these plastic and fibre trims, you don't want to be machine polishing a specific area for too long in one go. It's best to allow it to cool down after each set of passes and not to overly concentrate your machine in one specific area for too long.
Till the disco ball pops, but I have to be me, and everyone can see your anger is misplaced, and I'm gonna tell you, don't hate me 'cause I get attention. Don't turn me into what I'm not. I have to be me 24/7, and I ain't never gonna stop. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Oh, no, no, no. No, oh, oh, oh. And I ain't never gonna stop. Come on. Listen to me. I've tried so many times to tell you this is as good as I can be. Why isn't it enough to be faithful and also be the hit of the party? Let's just break it down to you and me uptown, dancing all around till the disco ball pops. But I have to be me, and everyone can see.
So when you add up machine choice, pad, compound and polish selection, together with paint type, machine pressure, arm speed, the surface material and the amount of row passes and sets, as well as residue control, there's a bit happening there to say the least. And it can be a bit daunting to have to consider all these things simultaneously. But the truth is, after a while, you really don't, at least not on a conscious level. Think of it like driving a manual car. You're pressing down on the clutch, shifting the gear knob, lifting on and off the accelerator, braking when necessary, turning the wheel as needed, and checking what your surroundings are doing. But it's not like you're specifically thinking about each step and factor as you go. You're just responding to what the situation requires, and paint correction is no different.
Gonna stop now, baby. Never gonna stop now, baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, 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 no. Never gonna stop now, baby. Woo-hoo.
Now, I also want to be real and forthcoming in saying that you don't need to adopt and consider all these points, factors and methods to correct paint, as plainly it's been done for the last century or so without the more recent developments in this trade. But I will also say that in the past I've been faced with the issues and questions like, why is this polish all of a sudden so hard to wipe off? Why does the finish look so bad? Why isn't this compound cutting like it was before? And why does the paint look worse after I've tried to correct it? The truth is that I don't ever see a time in my life where I'll be able to answer all the questions and situations I'm faced with in the area of detailing. But what I have discovered is that the more methodical and considerate I have become in my detailing process, the far less issues I've been faced with. It may seem like a waste of time to some to cover all the bases, as there is no getting around that it is a timely and somewhat expensive process to detail a vehicle to this level. But what I've also found out the hard way is that it's even more expensive and timely when things go wrong by not doing it right the first time around.
Listen to me. I've tried so many times to tell you this is as good as...
Once the compounding stage is complete, apart from a large sigh of relief from me, it's now time to start the second polishing stage. The car was given a quick touchless wash using CarPro's Reset for a foam pre-soak and the pressure washer to remove all the compounding dust that has bonded to the body, and compressed air was used to blow out any standing water. I'm not going to show the second and third stages of polishing over the entire vehicle, as apart from the process being much the same, with just differences in how the products are worked, this episode has already gone way over in length. As you may have noticed in some of the footage, there is some slight compounding haze and marks, which is absolutely normal, and removing those slight imperfections is what polishing is all about. As you would have seen in the last episode, CarPro's Reflect and their polishing pad is the combination I'm using for the second stage of correction. Unlike before the compounding stage, where the paint has various levels of imperfections, now it has quite a uniform finish to it. And although I still follow the same basic method and techniques, it's a far quicker process. Basically, one slower row pass at a faster machine speed to remove the imperfections, followed by two quicker passes at a reduced machine speed is all that is needed to remove the haze and refine the finish. And although I'm still checking each panel with an eraser wipe down, every section is being refined beautifully with just one set of 3 passes. And also, unlike the previous compounding stage, there is next to no dusting at all, and the polish wipe off is much easier as well. This is the reason why I prefer to do all the hard work in the compounding stage of both cutting and refining the finish, so that the next stages are just a pleasure to breeze through. Well, not always, especially with softer paints, but on a harder paint like this, it is a pleasure.
Hold on, girl, now wait just a minute. I've got something to say, you should hear it. Oh, I'm happy to make time for your feelings, but you have to admit I already do. Let's just break it down to you and me uptown, dancing all around.
The third and final stage is both a jeweling polish and the first layer of 3 that will be applied to protect the paint. As well as boosting the gloss with a more fine jeweling polish method, this stage also begins to increase the depth of the paint with the base coat sealant that CarPro's Essence leaves behind. Using the gloss pad and increasing the size of my work area and the speed of my arm movement, I'm using 0 pressure and an even slower machine speed with again just one set of 3 row passes. As I stated, Essence leaves a sealant behind on the paint, so it goes without saying that I don't want to use a razor or any IPA wipe down to remove any of that sealant. It's just gently buffed off with a microfiber cloth and left to cure for a minimum of 2 hours before I begin applying the next protective coating stage.
Come on. Listen to me.
I hope this breakdown of paint correction techniques, factors and methods was useful or at least interesting for some of you out there to watch. Part 6 and the final installment in this series will be about protecting all the hard work that's gone into this detail with durable nano or ceramic coatings, and of course having a look at the finished product. So until next time, please like, comment and subscribe to show your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.